My name is Jonathan Schreiber. I'm a sales engineer from ARX, and today we're going to be going over administrative training on the CoSign signature solution. This presentation will be available also from our website after the call. It might take a day or two to get up, as well as if anything in particular needs to be gone over again, we'd be happy to communicate with you on that subject. I want to start with a quick poll here. If you look at your GoToMeeting bar, you should see a poll. The question here is CoSign currently deployed at your company? Yes, no, or you're not sure? Okay, most people have answered the question at this point, and it looks like about 3/4 of you do have it deployed. I see a few people do not have it deployed, and some people aren't sure. This is going to be a webinar on administrating the CoSign Appliance, so it'll be pertinent if you either have it installed or your company is about to deploy it. I do want to ask one other question before we get started, which is for the people that were involved, that do have CoSign installed, or even if you don't have it installed yet, were you involved in the installation and admin training when CoSign was originally installed? So I am curious about that. I've gone ahead and opened that one up. Okay, and it looks like most people have voted and that they were not involved in the original installation administrative training. Okay, and there is one other question we can get to as the call progresses. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen to bring up the PowerPoint slides, and I'll go ahead and start the slideshow. As stated, we're going to be going through the CoSign Digital Signature Solution Administrative Webinar. So let's take a look at our agenda for today. We'll start off with an introduction of the CoSign features, CoSign components, what's actually involved in the signing process, and then another screen showing the architecture. Once that's complete, we'll go through how to configure the CoSign Appliance parameters, how to take a backup of the CoSign Appliance, some of the options available when it comes to high availability and load balancing, monitoring of the CoSign Appliance, as well as how to distribute the CoSign Client configuration to your end users. And then we'll have time for some Q&A at the end. So our introduction as stated. Let's go over some of the features of CoSign. CoSign provides a non-forgeable digital signature based on PKI. It's a centralized approach, so we have a central appliance that stores all of your certificate information, signing keys, as well as graphical signatures. It has a secure enclosure because it is appliance-based, it is on your network. And it provides extensive third-party application support. So we support signing of Office documents and PDF are definitely the most popular. But really, any product that natively supports digital signatures can be signed, such as CAD drawings as well. And then we also provide universal signing. So even if it's a document format, maybe it's only used at your company, you are able to apply a digital signature to it by using our print to CoSign method. We do support multiple user authentication methods, the most popular being username and password. And we'll show you more about that during this call. But we do also support CAC cards or the ID smart cards, random number generators, things of that nature. CoSign provides a built-in CA, and it's within the appliance. It's going to handle the generation of all of your user certificates and signing certificates and manage those for you. We also provide the ability to synchronize your user's database from a current existing directory system. And we'll show you the different options there. And I'll have a poll question regarding that later on. But we do sync. The most popular one is against Active Directory. So if you have a signers group in Active Directory, we'll sync against it. CoSign as a digital signature solution does manage your graphical signatures as well. As you can see in this image, we have a few scribbles on the page there, famously John Hancock, but also Patty King, and third one I can't honestly read the last name of, but we do manage the graphical signatures, and they're stored on the appliance itself. And lastly, we provide a signature API, also known as SAPI, which allows for easy integration with applications and systems, or if you're building your own web portal, things of that nature. So let's go through what components make up CoSign. The CoSign server, which is that network-attached appliance we saw an image of in the last screen, and it can be installed, as noted, in high availability mode, which we'll get into later in the call. There's the client-side software. So this is software that's installed on each end user's machine, corporate desktops and servers, that allows for signing. We do have web services, or SOAP APIs, that enable external applications to use CoSign capabilities. When you install the CoSign Client, one of the options is to install the administrative portion, which will install the Administrator Microsoft Management Console, or MMC, to snap in, installed on administrative machines, and we'll show you what capabilities that enables you to have later in the call. Lastly, as an administrator, you'll be excuse me. As an administrator, you'll also have access to the electronic pad that we provide with CoSign, provide one of them, and the drivers install on your machine, and so you can manage and capture the end user's signatures, which get stored on the appliance itself. Okay. So let's go through what happens in a typical digital signature process. So here we have our user who's going to log on and create a document. Next, the user is going to click on the sign option, depending on the document format. This will be click on the sign option, and the document hash is taken by the CoSign client and securely sent to CoSign over an SSL connection. Okay, now the RSA signature process begins, and CoSign syncs against the user's directory to verify the user's identity and signs that hash value. Lastly, the digital signature is sent securely back to the application for signing, and the native form of the document is digitally and graphically signed. Okay. So let's take a look at the basic architecture of CoSign. So here we have the CoSign Appliance in the middle, and you can see that, as noted in the last one, we have our end user who's going to be signing. The end user is in the top left, who can send back and forth to the appliance documents to be signed, or the hash of the documents to be signed. You can see CoSign is syncing directly off of the user's directory to keep a list of the valid users. But the authentication of that user is happening directly off of your user's directory. So CoSign communicates there to verify those credentials. The end user can also add graphical signatures to the system. And you'll see on the bottom here that the system handles the built-in CA. It's also the store of the private key repository, as well as graphical signatures. And all of that, by the way, is taken in the backup, which we'll get into backing up the system a little later in this call. In the bottom right-hand corner, you can see the administrator who has that snap-in for Microsoft Management Console and is able to administrate the CoSign appliance through that. Okay. So now let's talk about configuring specific CoSign appliance parameters. Okay. I notice there's a little delay, so I'm going to wait a moment between each slide just to let you know. So using the Management Console, as noted, when you are the CoSign administrator and you install the administrative plugin, it does provide for you that Microsoft Management Console for managing the CoSign appliance. The prerequisites for being a CoSign administrator, by the way, is that you are a valid CoSign user and your user is selected to be a CoSign administrator, which I'll speak to in just a moment. And lastly, you're logged into the appliance. So as noted, you can actually have CoSign syncing against your directory system, whether that's Active Directory or otherwise. In Active Directory, when you're syncing against Active Directory, rather, you create two users groups for CoSign. One is the CoSign signers group, CoSign users group. One is the CoSign admins group. To be a valid administrator of CoSign, you need to be a member of both groups, and that's very important. Simply being a member of the CoSign admins group will not grant you administrative access to CoSign. So that's why these prerequisites are written out in this fashion. If you are syncing against Active Directory, you need to be a member of both groups in order to be a valid administrator of CoSign. So let's take a look at what the main capabilities are of that Microsoft MMC. From the MMC snap-in, you can install the CoSign appliance and configure it. You can back up and restore CoSign data, as well as upload CoSign firmware updates, which come directly from ARX. You can process a manual synchronization of CoSign and the directory service, as well as monitor the appliance for logs and performance information. We'll be showing you how to do that toward the end of the call. This is also where you would configure the high availability and load balancing parameters. And you can do certificate management here as well. If you were syncing with an external certificate authority, managing the subordinate CA, or uploading an SSL certificate to the box. Lastly, you can view and modify system parameters, and we'll speak directly to the system parameters that are available in just a moment. Okay. So let's look at where that utility is actually located. The CoSign control panel, which by the way is under on a Windows system, Start, All Programs, ARX CoSign, CoSign control panel. When you have the administrative section installed, you'll see that bottom section of Appliances, Users Management, and Client Configuration Management. And we'll click on Appliances Management. The Appliance Management screen comes up with the MMC, which you can see here. And any CoSign appliance that it recognizes on the system will be listed. And you can see here 212.25.124.9 is listed. The CoSign version, the serial number, which is also the name of the appliance on your network, status of not logged in, and the role here, which is alternate. So this box was installed high availability, and it's the alternate appliance. Most of the time, it'll say primary. Okay. As noted, one of the functions we can do from the MMC is actually install an appliance. So here we're going to right-click on CoSign Appliances, All Tasks, Install, and if we're going to sync the CoSign appliance against Active Directory, then we're going to click on New Active Directory Appliance. And you can see that there are several options for how to install, what directory system to install against. Okay. Let's look at some of the other functionalities that are available in that right-click menu. So login is how we actually log into the appliance as ourselves. Now this is when you're right-clicking, by the way, on the appliance IP address. So here you can see we're not right-clicking on CoSign Appliances. We're right-clicking just below it on the CoSign demo box, which is what it's called, but on the CoSign IP. So we can log into the appliance. We can actually take a backup from here. So we click on Backup, which we'll do in just a moment in a later slide. We can upload software. This is the CoSign firmware versions that are going to be sent from ARX. So this is how you'd upload a firmware patch or firmware upgrade to the system. Synchronize is how you can process a manual synchronization with the directory system. You do have the ability to clear CA files, download logs in case you're in touch with a support representative. They would, of course, send you instructions, but this is the location of the log files for the appliance. You can restart the box. There are 3 types of restart. There's a soft restart, which is going to toggle the services on the appliance. A hardware restart, which is going to actually bring the appliance to a halt and power it back on, as well as a hardware restart, which is, a appliance shutdown, which is going to do just that. It's going to bring the appliance to a halt. You'll actually need to physically access the appliance and press the power button to turn it back on. The next menu here is high availability. This is how we manage the high availability and load balancing parameters on the appliance, how we manage alternate appliances. Subordinate CA, so this is where we can download the certificate request or upload the subordinate CA information to make CoSign subordinate of another internal CA system. You can upload the SSL certificate, and then there's also the CoSign Performance Monitor, which we'll get into in later slides as well. Okay. So let's keep going and using the appliance parameters here. So let's take a look, once we're logged into an appliance, at some of the settings we have here. So in this case, we're going to look at client security settings. Okay. This is going to be global. So these settings actually, for client security settings, are also available on a machine-by-machine basis. But this is going to set up some global rules. And you can see your prompt for signature. So do you want your users to be prompt for credentials, for username and password, or their CAC card, whatever it is, each time they sign? Okay. And you can see some other options here. Enable automatic user login. So there are some security settings which can be changed. And I should mention as we go through these that any option that you change within appliance management will require a soft or hard restart of the box. So you have to toggle those services off and on. So if we were to come in here and change prompt for signature from false to true, we would then want to right-click on the IP address of the appliance, select All Tasks, Restart, Soft Restart before that took effect. Okay. And actually, I believe that I have images of that. So we're changing this system prompt for signature, and then we do a soft restart. And you can see that here, All Tasks, Restart, Soft Restart. Okay. So other things that are available here are automatic user logon for directory independent mode. This is when you're not syncing with Active Directory. Okay. So it approves accessing the user's public information without presenting credentials. So you could set that to true or false. And again, when you have that set, you'd want to, I'm just going to go back one slide. If you want to change that, you would then go All Tasks Restart and perform a soft restart. So which aspects of the certificate can you actually change or have access to from the management utility here? And what we're going to go through excuse me, on these slides are the CDP and AIA locations, which are provided for in this screen. So the certificate distribution point is actually, it contains an updated CRL, the certificate revocation list. Contains information regarding revoked users' certificates, which is what's in the revocation list. CDP object is, by default, when you're syncing against Active Directory, when you've done an Active Directory install, is located in the sysvol of Active Directory. And it's the CDP location is put into the end user certificate. So after they sign, if you drill down that certificate information, that user certificate would contain CDP information. And when you're publishing to Active Directory in the sysvol, CoSign can actually update and publish the new CRLs when they're required. The AIA information is also published to sysvol, specifies the location of the root certificate within your network, and that information is also embedded into the end user certificate. So when you're syncing against Active Directory, it's actually quite simple because CoSign handles all of that publishing for you. These locations are actually set in during the initial installation, but you can check them or move them from the appliance management window. And so here we are. You can see that we've now selected the certificate management tab here, or option. And we've highlighted the CRL publishing frequency. So how often are we going to publish a new certificate revocation list, and it's set here for 1 day. Okay. You can also see on this screen the location. So you can see AIA publication location as well as CRL publication location are both listed here. Okay. So let's take a look on our next slide. We also have the ability, as mentioned earlier, we can do more than just username and password. We support more than just username and password. And I think there was a question here. Okay, there was a question regarding password prompts from users. The question specifically is when downloading files from SharePoint, our end users are being prompted for username and password. It's usually filled out, but it's an extra click. That's actually generally not a CoSign issue, but a SharePoint issue with regards to whether or not the user is logged into their Windows workstation through AD, and if the SharePoint environment is also syncing off of AD. So if you're logged into SharePoint, for example, from a machine that's not a domain machine, or you're logged in as a different user, when you click to download it, the program that's downloading it, for example, if you're opening a Word document, opening a PDF, would have to log in to SharePoint in order to download that file. It's a great question, and I'm happy to discuss that, especially since it's a little bit outside the scope of CoSign. I'll be happy to discuss that on a different call. Okay. But here we're talking about extended authentication. As stated, we can do more than just username and password. We support, I believe it highlights, if I go back to the slide here, built-in Radius and smart cards. We can also, so if you're doing Radius authentication, you would need to pay attention to the highlighted fields here. And we're going to highlight some more depending on which you're going with. For smart card authentication, you can see that we have the timeout. We have all sorts of credentials here that relate directly to smart card authentication. And lastly, biometrics, for example, fingerprint biometrics, things of that nature, where you have your settings here. So we do support them, and we have configuration utilities available for them depending on which one you're using. The most popular, of course, is to sync against Active Directory and use your Active Directory username and password. Okay. So let's talk about some, while Active Directory is the most popular, let's talk about some password policy that gets set in this screen when you're not syncing against Active Directory. So when you're using our CoSign Directory Independent mode, we're using CoSign's internal directory, then you'll have this password policy. And it's very similar to the password policy you'd find in Active Directory, things of that nature. You can set your minimum password length. You can set password validity periods, as well as requiring users to change their passwords, things of that nature. So when you're not syncing against Active Directory, you definitely have some options when it comes to password policy. Lastly, one last thing I want to speak about while we're here, and we're going to get into this a little further when we go into performance monitoring of the system, but actually under the Advanced tab is where we can set the CoSign debug level. And by default, I believe it's set to 2, and you can set it all the way up as high as 4. Of course, when you set it to 4, those logs are going to be rather large. So really, you're not going to go into this setting unless you have a CoSign support representative on the line or you're troubleshooting a specific issue. But here's where the CoSign debug level is, set to 2. Generally, if we're troubleshooting an issue that requires downloading the log, we'll have you toggle this to 4, restart the system, reproduce the situation, collect the log, and then we'll bring it back down to 2. That way we keep the log sizes reasonable. Okay. So the next topic on our list is actually to take a backup or restore the CoSign appliance. So how do we take a manual backup of the CoSign appliance? We're going to, and actually more importantly, what gets backed up with the CoSign backup utility. CoSign Backup Utility will back up in one file the CoSign database, which is the user key, certificate, graphical signatures, the internal CA files, as well as CoSign configuration data. So that CoSign configuration data refers to, say, for example, password policies, things of that nature, everything within appliances management, as well as any information with regards to the sync with AD. If you are syncing with Active Directory, it'll save that information as well. Okay. So how do we take excuse me, I should mention that the generated backup is saved as an encrypted file. Okay. And the backup file can only be decrypted using the CoSign Appliance. So when we do a restore functionality, you'll require three things. You'll require the excuse me, the backup file that you took, which is saved anywhere on your machine or a network drive, a valid CoSign appliance, as well as the decryption key or backup mini key created during the initial installation of CoSign. So the CoSign appliance came with 3 little USB keys, one of which is the red license key, which lives in the appliance, and 2 of them are blue backup keys, which are duplicates of each other. Only one of those keys is required for restore from backup. Okay. So how do we take a backup of the appliance? We open up the administrative MMC, and we right-click on the CoSign appliance once we're logged in, and we select All Tasks, Backup. It'll ask us where we'd like to backup, where we'd like to create the backup file and to give the backup file a name. Here we're just calling it backup and placing it on our desktop. A status bar will appear showing that we're copying the backup file from the appliance to the local system. And finally, the backup finishes successfully. And a backup of the system has been taken. Okay. So now we have our backup file. How do we restore an appliance from backup? Well, there are some parameters that have to be set, or met rather. The appliance has to be in factory settings mode. This means that if you have a current appliance, you would have to serial connect to the appliance and essentially wipe the database of the appliance. Or if it's a new appliance shipped to you, it should be in factory settings mode, but you'd have to check. And typically a ARX support representative would assist you in checking to make sure that it is in factory settings mode. Next, you would right-click on CoSign Appliances. So just to point out here, you're not right-clicking on the IP address. You're right-clicking on CoSign Appliances, All Tasks. And instead of clicking Install, you would click on Restore. And this will take us through the Restore options. So the first thing it's going to do is ask us to point at the backup file that we'd like to restore from. Next, it'll ask us for the built-in username and password, and these were created during initial installation. Okay. Now, during a restore process, you actually could change these, but if you do have them set as standard for your company, then it's probably best to enter the same ones, but that's, of course, entirely up to whomever is administrating the appliance. These credentials, by the way, are not in your Active Directory environment or your directory system. These are your local to CoSign. So CoSign's built-in administrative credentials. It'll then ask for the IP of the appliance you're restoring. It's going to go through some screens that are grayed out, which are confirming the installation details from that you're backing up from. So it's going to show you here, for example, your CA information. You won't be able to change anything because you're restoring from backup, but it's showing you what's going to be restored. And finally, we get to the progress bar, but we're not fully done yet. It's not hands-off at this point. You can see that the screen is asking us to insert the original installation's backup key, and that's one of those blue keys we spoke about earlier. So you'll need physical access to the appliance to go walk over and place the blue key into the appliance. Once it's read the blue key, it'll ask you to reinsert the license key, that red license key that lives in the appliance. And then the CoSign appliance installation will progress and finally complete successfully. Okay, so that's how to restore an appliance from a backup file, and we also went over how to retrieve that backup file from the appliance. Our next header here is high availability and load balancing. Okay, so I'm going to bring up a screen that shows a system diagram of high availability setup. You can see that we're going to have our domain controller, our Active Directory CoSign user, and our CoSign Appliance farm. So you should note here that the CoSign appliances are syncing against each other, so the alternates are syncing against the primary, and that's an IPsec secured communication, so secured replications. Okay. The primary appliance is the only one that's communicating with the domain controller. Okay, so one appliance is designated as primary, that's your original installation. Only the primary syncs with the directory service or domain controller. The alternate appliances, as stated, establish IPsec sessions with the primary for data replication. Okay. And they do actually announce themselves as, via service connection points and Active Directory. So as we'll show in a second, if one CoSign appliance is down, it'll roll to the next one. As you can see, your CoSign Client, the software installed in the end user's machine, detects the appliances automatically in the directory service. And it also, the SCP tells the client the status of that appliance, whether it's up or down. Okay. So let's look into a little further high availability and load balancing. And we're, of course, on an administrative phone call, so webinar rather, so let's talk about management features on the primary appliance only. So here on the primary, when the primary appliance is down, rather, CoSign users can continue signature operations. But users cannot be added or removed, because remember, only the primary is communicating with the directory service. Okay? And that primary and alternate appliance, the tag, the primary appliance or alternate appliance, those are static roles. Okay? Another important thing to note is that only the primary appliance can be backed up. And I should note, though, for example, I know that we've stated primary and alternate are static roles. But if there is a situation where you need to promote an alternate to be your new primary, that is possible to do. So we can promote an alternate, but you can only have one primary at a time. So if you promote an alternate, you're demoting a primary, which can happen in the case that you're possibly taking one box down for maintenance or replacement, etc. So how do we go to the primary and alternate appliances? How do we see the status of them? So you can see the status of your alternate appliances by logging into the primary appliance. And when you do, you'll see two folders instead of the one we saw earlier. And instead of going into system parameters, which we worked with earlier in this call, we're going to go into subscribed alternates. And under subscribed alternates, it's going to show us the serial number or the appliance name of the alternate appliance, the IP address of the alternate appliance, as well as its status, which will either show OK or sync or running. Here it shows OK, show the time, and it can also show typically what the last thing to sync was. So maybe it added a few users or removed a few users the last time that it synced with the primary. How do we actually install that alternate appliance? By right-clicking on the IP address of the primary. So we're not right-clicking on CoSign appliances. We're right-clicking on the IP address of the primary appliance, all tasks, and once we're logged in, we're able to click on high availability. And you can see here we have our options. We have to install the alternate, which is going to be a new installation of an alternate appliance. If we're clicking on the alternate's IP, we can set that alternate as primary. We can subscribe an alternate as well. So if you're turning back on an alternate appliance, you can resubscribe it here. Okay. So the last thing that we were going to speak about is monitoring the CoSign appliance and downloading or retrieving of logs. So CoSign Appliance does offer performance monitoring. It also does offer, as we noted earlier, and we'll get back into, appliance log files, and there are also CoSign Client logs that can be downloaded. Okay. How do we activate the performance monitoring of a CoSign appliance? From the MMC, once again, once you're logged in, right-click on the IP address of the appliance, All Tasks, CoSign Performance Monitor, and we'll click Start Monitor. This will bring up an options screen showing us how many hours we would like to monitor the system and how often we want to sample. In this case, we're going to monitor for 96 hours and we're going to sample every 15 seconds. Generally speaking, you would only turn this on when a ARX support representative asks you to turn this on the system. So here we're going to click OK, and the performance monitor gets started. How do we view these logs to analyze them? So we'll click on that same screen, All Tasks, CoSign Performance Monitor, and we'll select Download Log. And it'll ask us where we'd like to download it to, and you can see that it's downloading as a CSV file. Once that is downloaded, we can view it using the Windows Performance Monitor. Okay? And so here we can open it and take a look at the file that was created by CoSign. So here we're opening that specific file, and we're able to monitor, to take a look at the system over that period. We had selected 96 hours with a 15-second sampling, so we're able to view the system. Okay. What other log files are available? From the CoSign Appliance, we have the Appliance Event Log, which logs signing operations, major errors, and administrative actions such as backing up the appliance. The Appliance Debug Log, which is internal debug information for ARX internal use only. That means that typically you're only downloading that when a support representative has requested that log from you. Also, if you recall during our conversation of what parameters could be changed through the MMC, we did speak about where the debug log level is. And so typically when you requested that file, you would first go in and up the debug log level. And lastly, the Appliance Install Log, which is an internal debug information related to the installation process only. So if there was a problem during installation or we want to verify something about the installation, the ARX representative working with you would ask you for the installation log. Okay. There are also client log files, which on our next slide we're going to go into. Excuse me, not our next slide. It's about 3 slides away. My apologies. But there are client logs available, which will show on a client side, on an end user side that has the client software installed, the logs of a signing process. So not actually for the appliance, specific to a user, and we'll show that in just a moment. So where can we actually retrieve these log files from for the appliance? You can see here that if we go to All Tasks, Download Logs, we can download the event log, the debug log, or the install log from here. When we click on any one of those, it will ask us where we'd like to save it and what we'd like to call it. If you are sending this to an ARX representative, we always request that you put your company name in the name of the file. And it's going to give us a progress bar showing us the progress of downloading the log, creating the log, and downloading it. And finally, it's saved successfully. Okay. For our logs, you can generally view them using the Microsoft Event Viewer. Okay, so here's an example of one. We're going to open a log file. This is the log file that we just downloaded a moment ago. And here we can see everything that's going on. We can double-click to see exactly the information. So it's just basically the Windows Event Viewer viewing of a CoSign log file, of the event log, I should say. So I mentioned earlier that there are some logs that are available within Client Configuration. If you open up Client Configuration on an end user's machine, you'll see under Client as well as under Signature API and Microsoft Office that under the Miscellaneous tab, you have the option to set a log. And so here, the detail level, he's selected no log. Generally speaking, if you're trying to collect a log, you would set that to detail. And you can specify a file location where you want that log to download, to write to. And if you select a location, a file name rather that doesn't exist, it'll create it for you. Okay. So here are the detail level options. You have no log, errors, warnings, messages, details, and functions. And as stated, most of the time, if we're troubleshooting an error, we would want that set to details. Okay. The last thing that we're going to discuss is the distribution of the CoSign Client configuration. So your end users with CoSign Client installed, there are options for example, how often they are prompted for a reason code or the default reason code that appears, whether or not when they open a signed Word document, the Word document automatically verifies the signature or not. These are all settings that can be set on an end user's machine, and the list goes on. Okay. So when the users set these things, they get saved to their local registry. So the configuration files that you can grab are actually valid registry files. And there are 3 methods for distributing those registry settings. One is manually, using the configuration files. So you take the RAG, move it to the desktop, and load it. You can use login scripts or any distribution software, as well as Active Directory group policy. Okay. When you do a manual configuration distribution using the configuration files, we're going to select a certain machine with the desired settings. So you set up one user the way that you want all of your users to be defined. And from the client configuration screen, which is in the control panel client configuration, we're going to select File and Export to Configuration File. Okay. And this is going to allow us to save that REG file, the registry settings, to an individual file, which we can then copy to another machine or to a network location. And on the next machine, you can double-click on that REG file, select Yes to load that registry file to the registry, click OK that it's been done successfully. And of course, just as applying any registry setting, it may require a restart of the machine in order to accept the new configuration. Okay. But now the new configuration is loaded. We spoke about using Active Directory group policy, so let's talk about how to use Active Directory group policy to push out the registry settings. So we're going to set a certain machine with the desired settings. Now, you'll notice here the screen looks a little different. This is going to be a machine that has the administrative console installed, and you'll go to Client Configuration Management. So you have to make sure that you click on the correct piece here. Instead of Client Configuration, you're going to click on Client Configuration Management. And once it's set up correctly, we're going to click on File and select Export to Group Policy. And this will allow us to select which users group to apply the configuration to. And we'll click Save. And of course, whichever rules are in effect for that group policy, the settings will be pushed to the users. Okay. So questions? If you have access to the system here, you can type in your questions in the questions bar or in the chat window. Just to go over, so today we've gone through an introduction of the CoSign system, the features, components, and signing process, as well as architecture. We've gone through configuration of CoSign Appliance parameters, backing up of the CoSign Appliance, high availability load balancing. We went through backup and restore of the CoSign Appliance, monitoring the CoSign Appliance and viewing the logs, as well as distributing the CoSign Client configuration. Okay. So let's take a look here at some questions. We have one here: can the backup be scheduled to run automatically? There actually is a command line version of the backup utility which can be used. So on any machine that has the CoSign Client installed with the administrative section, there's a small utility get backup that can be run. Of course, anything that can be run from command line can be scheduled as a Windows timer job. So I hope that answers the question. As noted at the beginning of the call, I do see that we have more people here than before. The video of this slide session will become available on our website for download. Okay. Okay, here's a good question regarding setting up a user's system. The question is, if the user does not have admin rights, can a admin install the reg settings, or does the user's right have to be elevated? I assume you mean administrative rights to their own machine, and it's fine. An administrator can come in and load the registry, and then that user settings would be changed. The user does not have to be elevated. Okay. Okay. So there's also a question regarding, is there a way to monitor, is there a way to download the changes that have been made to the appliance? So any change to the appliance would be in appliances management, and that's where you would view them. The default settings are not really logged anywhere. They are the default settings, though, and I believe each parameter will show. I could check that for you, but I believe each parameter shows what the default is when you click on it. But I can certainly, I believe Fred's the one that asked that question. I can certainly look that up and get back to you on it. So there's another question here regarding how to retrieve this video. There's actually going to be an email going out from our marketing department with details of where this video will be available online. We do, though, have a similar webinar that's already available on our support site. If you go to arx.com, there's a support link at the top of the page. And there is a CoSign administrative training webinar available, video rather, available there, as well as yesterday's webinar, the end user training. There's a similar video to that available on our site in the support section as well. Okay, I think that about wraps us up here. If you do have any further questions, please feel free to email support@arx.com, or you can go on our ARX website to our support forums, and you can post to our forums if you have further questions, or you can read up on what other people have asked and had answered on our forums as well. So arx.com or support@arx.com. Thank you all for attending.